Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the absolute worst places to live in medieval times where survival feels like a cruel game of chance. Picture yourself trudging through a muddy street, the air thick with the stench of rotting garbage and human waste, while rats scuttle past your feet. Every corner of this world tests your grit honestly. You probably won't survive this, but let's take the journey anyway. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're chilling as we explore this grim past. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the heart of a medieval city, ankle-deep in a soupy mix of mud, animal dung, and who knows what else. The streets are a labyrinth of filth, unpaved and churned into a permanent sludge by carts, horses, and countless boots. It's not just dirt open gutters run alongside carrying a vile stream of sewage from homes and tanneries. You gag as the smell hits a blend of decay and sour milk that clings to your clothes. Step carefully. One wrong move and you're slipping into something unspeakable. Most cities like London or Paris in the 1300s had no proper waste systems. Historical records show that butchers dumped entrails and townsfolk tossed chamber pots straight into the streets, creating a breeding ground for disease. But it's not just the muck. Look up and you see timber houses leaning so close they nearly touch, blocking sunlight and trapping the stench below. These narrow paths are a fire trap waiting to spark. And when they do, entire districts burn. A quirky tidbit. Some townsfolk believed smearing crocodile dung on their faces warded off sickness. Spoiler, it didn't. You tried dodging a cart splashing sludge your way, only to bump into a pig rooting through garbage. Yes, livestock roam free, adding to the chaos. Historians still argue whether city officials ignored the mess out of laziness or because they thought the smell kept demons away. Either way, you're stuck breathing it. The noise doesn't help. Hawkers shout, dogs bark, and church bells clang at all hours. Sleep, good luck. You shuffle past a pile of rotting fish, wondering how anyone lives like this. Yet people do thousands cram into these cities drawn by trade or fleeing rural starvation. You spot a child tossing a bucket's contents from a window, narrowly missing you. Watch it, you mutter, but nobody cares. Privacy is a myth. Homes are packed and walls are thin. Disease festers here, cholera, dysentery, you name it. One wrong sip of water and you're done. Even the wealthy can't escape. Their fancy houses still sit above the same fetid streets. You pause at a corner, eyeing a tavern's flickering light. It's tempting, but the ale's probably watered down with something nasty. A rat darts past, bold as you please, and you shudder. This city's a living thing, and it's not your friend. It's barely survivable, yet somehow people carve out lives here, dodging filth and praying for a clean breeze. You take a cautious step forward, already dreading what's around the next bend. The medieval world doesn't care if you make it through the day, and these streets are proof. Keep moving, though there's no turning back now. You've barely escaped the reeking streets, but now you're squeezing through a creaking doorway into one of the city's crowded tenements, your new home, if you can call it that. The air inside is stale heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies and damp wood. You duck under a sagging beam, your eyes adjusting to the dim flicker of a single tallow candle. This is no cosy apartment. It's a rickety, overstuffed wooden box where dozens of families cram together sharing walls thinner than parchment. You're shoulder to shoulder with strangers, their coughs and snores filling the night. Space is a luxury you don't have. Your room is a corner with a straw mat, maybe 6 feet by 4 if you're lucky. These tenements, common in cities like Florence or York in the 1400s, were death traps. Historical records note that fires spread fast through their timber frames, wiping out entire blocks in hours. The Great Fire of London in 1666 wasn't medieval, but it showed how these packed wooden structures burned like kindling. You feel the floorboards groan underfoot, warped from leaks and age. A quirky tidbit, some tenants kept chickens indoors for eggs, so don't be surprised if a hen clucks past your feet. Historians still argue whether landlords crammed people in for profit or because cities had no space left to build. You try to settle on your mat, but the walls shake as a neighbour bangs a pot. Privacy. Forget it. You hear every argument, every sneeze. The air's so thick you can taste it, a mix of smoke and sweat. Windows, if they exist, are tiny and glassless, letting in drafts, but no light. You're freezing in winter, roasting in summer, and the bugs, fleas and lice are your new roommates itching you awake. You scratch, muttering about modern mattresses, but there's no escape. Everyone's got bites. It's just life. Worse, the tenement's a fire hazard. Candles and open hearths are everywhere, and one clumsy move could torch the place. You eye the ceiling, half expecting embers from someone's cooking fire to drift down. If a blaze starts, the narrow stairs are your only exit, and they're clogged with people and junk. You're not paranoid, just realistic. Then there's the rot. Damp seeps into everything, turning beams spongy. You poke a wall and it crumbles. Collapse isn't a question of if, but when. You're not alone in this misery. Families pack in kids, wailing old folks hacking. Disease loves these places. Smallpox, tuberculosis, you name it. You hold your breath when someone coughs, but it's pointless. The water's no better. You share a bucket from a well that's probably tainted. Food. Stale bread, maybe some thin soup if you're lucky. You're always hungry and the market's prices are a cruel joke. Speaking of jokes, here's one. Why'd the tenement dweller bring a ladder to bed? Because the roof's the only place with room to stretch. You try to sleep, but the noise is relentless, creaking wood shouting a baby's cry. You're bone-tired, but rest is a fantasy. This tenement's a pressure cooker, and you're trapped inside. You think back to the filthy streets outside. At least they had air. Here you're boxed in, praying the walls hold another day. You shift on your mat, dodging a drip from the ceiling, and wonder how anyone survives this. But they do day after day in these crumbling, crowded hives. You're not sure you're that tough, but you've got no choice. Morning's coming and you've got to face it. You stumble out of the suffocating tenement, desperate for air, only to find yourself ankle-deep in a sluggish brown stream that snakes through the city. This isn't a river you'd picnic by, it's an open sewer. A stinking channel of human waste, kitchen slop, and tannery runoff. You gag covering your nose, but the smell's like a punch you can't dodge. Sewage rivers, as medieval folks charmingly called them, flow right through town centres in places like Paris or Cologne in the 1300s. You're trying to cross the street, but there's no bridge, just a wobbly plank some optimist laid down. One misstep, and you're swimming in filth. Historical records like complaints from London's city wards show these sewers were basically ditches where everything got dumped. Chamber pots, dead. Animals, you name it. They were meant to carry waste to rivers, but often they just sat there festering. A quirky tidbit. Some townsfolk tossed in herbs like lavender to sweeten the air. Good luck with that. Historians still argue whether cities let these sewers overflow because of poor planning or because nobody cared until the stench hit the rich neighbourhoods. You tiptoe along the plank eyeing the murky flow. It's not just gross, it's deadly. Cholera and dysentery love this stuff, and one splash on your skin could be trouble. You spot a kid tossing a bucket's contents from a window, adding to the mess. Really, you mutter, dodging the spray. The street's a maze of these channels, some covered with flimsy boards, others wide open. You're playing a grim game of hopscotch, praying you don't slip. Even the cobblestones where they exist are slick with slime. The noise doesn't help. Hawkers shout over the gurgle of the sewers and carts rumble past splashing muck. You're not just fighting the smell, but the chaos pigs root nearby and a dog laps at the edge of the stream. You shudder thinking of the well you drank from yesterday. Is this where it ends up? Probably. Clean water's a myth here. Most folks don't know germs exist, so they shrug and sip anyway. You're smarter, but that doesn't mean you've got options. You pass a butcher's shop where blood and guts drip into the same channel. The mix is a nightmare sewage offal and who knows what from the dye vats upstream. Your stomach churns, but you've got to keep moving. A joke to lighten the mood. Why'd the medieval sewer get promoted? It was the best at going with the flow. You're not laughing, though. The air's so thick it's like breathing soup in your shoes. If you can call these rags, shoes are soaked. You spot a market ahead, but getting there means crossing another sewer. This one's wider with no plank in sight. Some locals wade through bare-legged like it's normal. You hesitate, weighing your odds. Starve or risk the plunge. Tough call. You think back to the tenement's fleas and the street's dung piles honestly. This might be worse. The city's a living beast, and these sewers are its veins pumping poison through every corner. You take a shaky step, cursing whoever thought this was a good system. Survival here means ignoring the horror and pretending you're fine. You're not fine, but you're still standing for now. You've just navigated the vile sewage river, your shoes squelching with every step when a sudden wave of panic hits. The city around you feels feverish, people whisper in doorways, and a church bell tolls ominously. You're in the grip of a plague outbreak, the Black Death itself, tearing through this medieval hellhole like wildfire. It's the 1340s, and towns like Florence or London are losing half their people. You're dodging neighbours who look fine one day and are carted off in shrouds the next. The air's thick with fear, and every cough makes you flinch. Historical records like Chronicles from the Time describe the Black Death's devastation, bodies piled in streets, entire families wiped out in days. It spread through fleas on rats, but nobody here knows that. They blame bad air, or God's wrath? A quirky tidbit. Some folks wore bird masks stuffed with herbs thinking it'd save them. Spoiler, it just made them look ridiculous. Historians still argue whether the plague's spread was worse in cities due to filth or because trade routes brought it faster. You hurry down a narrow street, but it's no escape. A cart rattles past stacked with corpses wrapped in rags. The driver face covered shouts for you to clear the way. You press against a wall, heart pounding. Every doorway's marked with a red cross if someone inside's sick or dead. You're healthy so far, but for how long? You pass a woman clutching a rosary, muttering prayers. She's got a swollen lump on her neck, a bubo, the plague's calling card. You give her a wide berth, feeling guilty but not stupid. The city's a ghost town in places, shops, boarded up markets half empty. But the noise, God, the noise. Wailing bells and desperate preachers shouting about the end of days. You're tempted to join them, but you've got to keep moving. A joke to cut the tension. Why'd the plague skip the tavern? Even germs know the ale's poisoned. You're not laughing, though. You're thirsty, but the water's a gamble and food's scarce. Plagues killed the bakers, too. You duck into an alley hoping for quiet, but a man's there coughing blood. You back away, tripping over a stray cat. Cats are rare now. Folks think they're cursed. If only they knew the rats are the real enemy. You're paranoid, checking your skin for lumps every hour. Sleep's impossible. Every creak could be a sick neighbour or a thief looting empty homes. You think back to the sewage rivers. Maybe they carried this curse too. Everything's connected in this filthy maze. You're not just fighting disease, but despair. The church says pray, the doctors say bleed yourself, and the wise just run. But where to? The plague's everywhere, and you're no noble with a country manor. You're stuck weaving through a city that's half graveyard. You pull your cloak tighter as if that'll help and keep walking. Survival's a coin toss and you're not feeling lucky. But you've made it this far through muck and fear. Maybe you're tougher than you think, or maybe the plague's just biding its time. You've escaped the plague's shadow for now, but your stomach's growling and the city's no help. You're scrounging for food and it's a grim hunt. The market stalls are half bare, and what's left is barely edible, mouldy bread, shriveled vegetables and meat that smells like it's been dead too long. You're in a medieval urban sprawl. Maybe London or Bruges in the 1300s, where hunger's a constant companion. You clutch a few coins, but they won't buy much. The vendor's eyeing you like you're the one who's spoiled. Historical records like those from medieval chroniclers describe how food shortages plagued cities, especially after bad harvests or wars. Peasants and workers ate bread stretched with sawdust or worse. A quirky tidbit. Some bakers hid stones in loaves to fake weight, hope you don't crack a tooth. Historians still argue whether famine hit harder because of greedy merchants hoarding or because crop failures were just that brutal. You grab a loaf, its crust speckled green. You're hungry enough to risk it, but the thought of maggots makes you pause. You sniff some cheese rancid. The meat's no better. Flies buzz over it like they've claimed it first. You're not picky, but this is a gamble. You think back to the plague carts. Maybe starvation's just a slower death. A vendor offers you a turnip, but it's soft and reeks. Fresh, he lies, and you roll your eyes. A joke to keep you sane, Why's medieval food so bad? Because the chef's best spice is despair. You're not alone in this. Crowds shove past, grabbing scraps. A kid swipes an apple and the vendor's after him with a stick. You'd laugh, but you're too tired. The market's a racket, shouts haggling and the clink of coins you don't have. You're dizzy from hunger and the air's thick with smoke from a nearby fire pit roasting. Something. You don't ask. Food's not just scarce, it's dangerous. Nobody's washing anything, and that butcher's knife looks like it's seen a war. Dysentery's a real risk, but so's collapsing right here. You settle for the mouldy bread tearing off the worst bits. It's gritty like chewing dirt and your stomach's already protesting. You're supposed to be grateful this is luxury for most. The rich eat spiced meat and white bread. You're stuck with this sludge. You pass a tavern, it's ale tempting, but you've heard it's brewed with river water. Nope. You think of the sewage rivers you crossed, yeah, that's probably in the stew too. You're weaving through the crowd when a fight breaks out over a sack of grain. Fists fly, and you duck, clutching your pathetic loaf. Survival's not just finding food, but keeping it. Thieves are everywhere, and you're no fighter. You're bone-thin weaker every day. The city doesn't care. It's a machine that grinds the poor into dust. You take a cautious bite, praying it doesn't kill you. This is life here. Every meal's a risk, and hunger's the only certainty. You keep moving, dreaming of a day you're not starving, but that's a fairy tale in this world. You're clutching your mouldy bread stomach, still rumbling as you slip away from the chaotic market into a maze of narrow, shadowy alleys. The sun's dipping low and these dark passages feel like a trap waiting to spring. You're in the underbelly of a medieval city, think Paris or York, around 1350, where thieves and cutthroats rule after dusk. The walls close in barely wide enough for two to pass, and the air's damp, reeking of rot and fear. You hear footsteps behind you, but when you turn, there's nothing but darkness. Your heart's pounding, you're not paranoid, just sensible. Historical records like court rolls from the time show that urban crime was rampant. Pickpockets, muggers, and worse prowled these alleys. Night watches were underfunded and often corrupt. A quirky tidbit: some thieves used trained dogs to snatch purses, scampering back to their masters. Historians still argue whether crime spiked because of poverty or because city guards were too busy extorting tavern owners to care. You quicken your pace, the bread tucked under your cloak. The alleys twist, disorienting, and every corner hides a threat. A shadow moves a man with a knife or just a drunk. You don't wait to find out. The cobblestones are uneven, slick with who knows what, and you nearly trip. You're thinking of the sewage rivers you waded past, at least they were open. Here there's no escape. You hear a scream cut short and your blood runs cold. This isn't a place for heroes. The noise is subtle but constant: rats, skittering a distant dog's bark, your own ragged breathing. You're not armed, a knife costs more than you've got, and besides, you're no fighter. You pass a doorway where a woman's muttering, her eyes wild. "Lost my coin," she hisses, and you hurry on. A joke to steady your nerves. Why'd the thief rob the alley? Because the streets were too crowded to run. You're not laughing, though. You're exposed a target in rags. You spot a flicker of light ahead. A tavern may be salvation, but taverns breed trouble too. Brawls spill into these alleys nightly. You think back to the tenement's thin walls. At least you could hide there. Hear your prey. You're not alone, others scurry through, heads down, clutching bundles. A boy darts past, probably a pickpocket. You check your bread, still there for now. The city's a beast, and these alleys are its claws snatching the careless. You're almost at the main street when a hand grabs your shoulder. You spin heart in your throat, but it's just a beggar palm out. Spare a crust, he croaks. You hesitate, kindness could cost you. You break off a piece, cursing your soft heart, and he's gone. The alley's still watching, though. You're not safe until you're out, and even then, safe is a lie. You keep moving, praying for moonlight to guide you. Survival here means eyes sharp and feet fast. You're learning, but one wrong turn could teach you the hard way. It seems like you might have mistyped or intended something specific with V. Since you're following the bedtime history script writing workflow, I'm guessing you meant to say, continue to proceed with the next section, section 7, of the 28-part narrative on the worst places to live in medieval times. If that's not what you meant, please clarify, and I'll adjust accordingly. Maybe you're asking for a version check, a different task, or something else. Assuming you meant continue, here's the next section based on the outline's 7th bullet. Noisy markets. You endure chaotic, ear-splitting bazaars daily. Section 7. You've just escaped the dark alleys, your nerves frayed when you're swept into a roaring tide of noise and bodies. You're in the heart of a medieval market, a sprawling, chaotic bazaar that makes the plague-ridden streets seem calm. It's daytime now, and cities like Bruges or Florence in the 1400s come alive with these deafening hubs. You're jostled by elbows, stepped on by boots, and nearly flattened by a cart piled with cabbages. The air's a wall of sound vendors, bellowing bells clanging, and a donkey braying like it's auditioning for the apocalypse. Your head's pounding, and there's no escape. Historical records like merchant guilds' logs show markets with a pulse, of medieval cities drawing thousands daily for trade. They were so loud that laws tried to limit bell ringing to keep the peace. A quirky tidbit. Some vendors hired criers to outshout rivals, turning sales into a screaming match. Historians still argue whether markets were louder because of packed crowds or because nobody had an indoor voice. You're trying to buy a scrap of cloth, but the vendor's yelling about his finest wool over a rival's pitch for miracle fish. You can't think straight. The smells don't help. Sweat, spices, and rotting fruit blend into a dizzying haze. You dodge a pile of fish guts, then nearly trip over a crate of live chickens. The ground's a mess of mud and trampled straw, and you're still clutching that mouldy bread from earlier praying. Nobody snatches it. You think of the quiet tenement corner cramped, but at least you could hear yourself think. A fight breaks out nearby, 2 men over a spilled sack of grain. Fists fly and the crowd cheers like it's a sport. You back away, bumping into a woman selling herbs. Cure's all she shrieks, and you mutter, "Got anything for noise?" A joke to keep you grounded. Why'd the market vendor yell? Because whispering doesn't sell turnips. You're not smiling, though. Your ears are ringing and a headache's blooming. You spot a thief slipping through eyeing purses. You've got nothing worth stealing, but that doesn't make you feel safer. The market's a living beast and you're caught in its jaws. You try bargaining, but the vendor's too busy shouting to hear. Coins change hands, deals are struck, and you're just trying to survive the crush. You're hungry, tired, and now half deaf. You think of the sewage rivers and dark alleys. This is brighter but no less brutal. You push forward, dreaming of silence, but the market's got no mercy. Survival here means shouting louder, moving faster, and hoping you don't lose more than you're hearing. You've staggered out of the deafening market ears, still ringing only to find yourself at the gates of a looming stone fortress. You're inside a dank castle now, a place that sounds grand but feels like a tomb. It's the 1300s maybe, a stronghold in England or Bavaria, and you're no lord, just a servant or guard stuck in this cold, mouldy maze. The air's heavy with damp, and the walls weep moisture leaving slimy trails. You're shivering, your thin cloak no match for the chill that seeps into your bones. Torches flicker, but they don't warm you. They just cast shadows that make every corner feel alive. Historical records like castle inventories from the time describe how even noble fortresses were barely livable, draughty, dark, and damp. Stone walls held cold like a grudge, and heating was a luxury. A quirky tidbit. Some castles used dried cow dung for fuel, so you're breathing that lovely aroma. Historians still argue whether castles were colder because of poor design or because lords skimped on firewood to save coin. You trudge down a spiral staircase, your boots slipping on worn stone. The walls are bare, no tapestries for you. Those are for the Lord's Hall. You're bunked in a corner of the guard room, sharing a straw pallet with 3 others. It's lumpy, crawling with fleas, and smells like a wet dog. You're thinking of the market's chaos. At least it was warm. Here you can see your breath, and the only sound's the drip, drip of water somewhere deep. You're supposed to feel safe, but this place feels like it's waiting to crush you. Sleep's a joke. The wind howls through arrow slits and rats skitter in the dark. You're up at dawn anyway, hauling water or scrubbing floors. The Lord's family might dine on venison, but you're lucky to get gruel watery and cold. You pass a kitchen maid, her hands raw from lye. Warm today, you quip, and she snorts. A joke to keep you sane. Why's the castle so chilly? Because the Lord's heart's made of ice. You're not laughing, though. Your fingers are numb, and a cough settling in, probably from the mould. The castle's not just cold, it's a trap. Narrow halls, steep drops, and no light. If war comes, you're cannon fodder. You hear stories of sieges where servants starved while lords bargained. You're expendable and you know it. You think back to the tenements crowds or the market's noise. Those were bad, but this isolation's worse. You're cut off, forgotten in stone. You huddle closer to a torch, dreaming of sunlight, but the castle's got no warmth to give. Survival here means enduring the cold, the dark, and the feeling you're already buried. You've dragged yourself out of the castle's icy grip, trading stone walls for a muddy path leading to a rural village. You're now in a peasant hovel, a low crumbling shack that's more dirt than shelter. It's the 1300s somewhere in the English countryside, or maybe northern France, and this is home if you can call a leaky, smoky hut that. You duck under a sagging thatch roof, the air inside thick with soot and the tang of unwashed wool. The floor's packed earth damp and cold, and your bed is a pile of straw in the corner. You're already itching. Fleas love this place. Historical records like manor court rolls show that peasant homes were barely livable, often one room for a whole family plus livestock. Roofs leaked and walls were just woven sticks and mud, a quirky tidbit. Some peasants slept with their pigs for warmth, so don't be surprised if a snout nudges you at night. Historians still argue whether these hovels were worse because of neglectful landlords or because peasants had no resources to build better. You're trying to light a fire, but the wood's wet and smoke stings your eyes. The hearth's just a pit in the floor and the chimney's a hole in the roof if it works. You're coughing and the kids huddled nearby are too. You share this shack with 6 others, plus a goat that's eyeing your straw. Privacy's a fantasy. You hear every snore, every argument. You think of the castle's chill. At least it had walls. Here the wind cuts through gaps and rain drips on your face. Food's a problem. You've got a sack of barley, maybe some onions, but it's not enough. The bread you bake is gritty and you're always hungry. You're too poor for meat unless a chicken stops laying, then it's stew time. A joke to lift the mood. Why'd the peasant love his hovel? Because the rent was just his soul. You're not smiling, though. The roof's leaking again and you're out of straw to patch it. You're bone-tired from ploughing fields for a lord who'll take most of your crop. The hovel's not just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Fire's a risk one spark and this tinderbox is gone. Disease festers too, no clean water, no sanitation. You're fetching from a stream that's more mud than water. You think back to the city's sewage rivers, this isn't much better. The village is quiet, but that's no comfort. You're isolated at the mercy of weather and whims. If the harvest fails, you starve. If the lord's in a mood, you're whipped. You huddle closer to the fire, praying it catches, and wonder how anyone calls this living. Survival here means scraping by one muddy day at a time. You're still shivering in the peasant hovel, but now you're trudging through a sodden village, your boots sinking into a sea of mud. You're in a flooded lowland hamlet, maybe in the Netherlands or eastern England, around 1350, where water's both a lifeline and a curse. Rain's been falling for days, turning paths into rivers and fields into swamps. Your clothes are soaked heavy with grime, and every step feels like wading through glue. The air's damp, buzzing with mosquitoes that bite your neck raw. You're not sure what's worse, the mud or the itch. Historical records like monastic chronicles describe how low-lying villages drowned in floods, especially during the wetter climate of the Little Ice Age. Homes and crops were lost and famine followed. A quirky tidbit. Some villagers wore wooden clogs to slog through mud, fashionable, but they still sank. Historians still argue whether floods were worse due to deforestation or because nobody maintained the dikes. You're trying to reach the village square, but the path's a brown slurry. Your shack's back there, its floor now a puddle, and your straw bed's a soggy mess. You're hauling a sack of barley, praying it stays dry, but water's seeping through. You pass a neighbour bailing out his home with a bucket. He looks as defeated as you feel. Good day, you call, half joking. He grunts. A joke to keep you moving. Why's the village so wet? Because the sky's got a grudge. You're not laughing, though. Your feet are numb and a cough's brewing. The village is a wreck. Houses lean, their mud walls dissolving. Livestock drown in pens and crops rot in fields. You're hungry, but the harvest is gone and the Lord still wants his share. You think of the hovel's smoky fire-damp woods useless now. Mosquitoes swarm and you slap at them knowing they carry fever. The well's tainted with runoff. Drinking, it's a gamble. You're remembering the city's sewage river's different mess. Same misery. You spot a church on higher ground, its bell tolling for yet another funeral. Floods don't just ruin homes, they kill. You're wading past a collapsed barn dodging floating debris. Kids splash nearby oblivious, but their parents' faces are grim. Survival's a fight against water, and you're losing. You're exhausted hauling your sack, dreaming of dry land. This village is sinking and you're stuck in its mire one muddy step at a time. You've barely dragged yourself out of the flooded village, your boots caked with mud when you find yourself on a narrow forest trail. You're now deep in bandit woodlands, somewhere in the wilds of medieval Germany or France. Around 1370. The trees loom tall, their branches blocking out the sun, and every rustle makes you jump. The air's thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. But there's something else danger. You're alone clutching a worn stick for protection, and the path ahead twists into shadows. Bandits haunt these woods and you're an easy mark. Historical records like court documents from the period describe how forests were havens for outlaws, deserters, runaway serfs, or just desperate men. Travellers were robbed or worse with little chance of justice. A quirky tidbit. Some bandits left crude warning signs like skulls on sticks to scare off travellers' charming decor. Historians still argue whether banditry spiked because of wars displaced men or because lords failed to patrol their lands. You're moving fast, eyes darting. A twig snaps and you freeze, heart hammering. Is it a deer or something worse? You're thinking of the flooded village's misery. At least water didn't carry a knife. Here every shadow's a threat. You're no fighter, your stick's more hope than weapon. The path's overgrown roots tripping you up. You're carrying a small sack of grain, all you've got, and losing it means starvation. You hear a low whistle birds or a signal you're not waiting to find out. The silence is worse than noise. No birds now, just your ragged breathing. You're remembering the market's chaos. You'd take that racket over this eerie quiet. A joke to steady your nerves. Why'd the bandit rob the forest? Because the trees don't snitch. You're not smiling, though. You spot a broken arrow on the ground recent. Your grip tightens on the stick. You're not just fighting fear, but hunger. You haven't eaten since dawn and the grain's too precious to cook. You pass a clearing where a charred cart lies overturned. Robbed, probably burned. You're not stopping to check. The woods feel alive watching. You're a nobody, but to a bandit, you're a payday. You think of the castle's cold walls safe in a way compared to this. Survival here means moving silent, staying sharp. You're almost at the path's end when you hear hooves. Friend or foe, you dive behind a tree praying you're invisible. The woods don't care if you make it out, but you're not giving up yet. You've just slipped out of the bandit-infested woods, heart still racing when you stumble into a small, eerie village. You're now in a witch hunt town, maybe in the Rhineland or East Anglia, around 1400, where paranoia hangs thicker than fog. The streets are quiet, too quiet, and every glance from a passerby feels like an accusation. You're an outsider, and that's dangerous here. The air smells of wood smoke and fear, and you're clutching your grain sack trying to blend in. A crude wooden cross looms in the square, a grim reminder of what happens to the cursed. Historical records like trial documents from the early witch hunts show how small towns turned on their own blaming neighbours for failed crops or sick livestock. Accusations were enough to condemn. A quirky tidbit. Some villagers tested suspects by tossing them in ponds if they floated they were witches. If they sank, oops, innocent. Historians still argue whether these hunts exploded due to religious zeal or because social tensions needed a scapegoat. You're hurrying past a cluster of homes, their shutters slammed tight. You hear whispers from a doorway, two women eyeing you, muttering about strange signs. Your worn cloak and muddy boots don't help. You look like trouble. You're thinking of the forest's bandits. At least their threat was clear. Here, a wrong word could land you in chains. You pass a baker's stall, but he crosses himself when you approach. Not today, you mutter, moving on, a joke to ease the tension. Why'd the witch hunt town stay quiet? Because nobody wanted to be the loudest suspect. You're not laughing, though. The church bell tolls and you flinch. It's calling a trial and a crowd's gathering. You glimpse a woman, hands bound, being dragged to the square. Her eyes are wide, pleading, but the mob's shouting. Heretic, you're not sticking around. You're hungry, but eating in public might draw eyes. Someone might claim you cursed the bread. You think of the plague-ridden city. Even that felt less judgmental. The village is small, but it's a pressure cooker, every neighbour a spy. You're almost at the edge of town when a child points at you, giggling witch. It's a game to her, but a man nearby narrows his eyes. You walk faster, head down. Survival here means invisibility. Don't talk, don't linger. You're not a witch, but truth doesn't matter when fear rules. You slip past the last house, the villagers glare at your back and pray the next stop's kinder. This town's a trap, and you're barely out alive. You've fled the suffocating paranoia of the witch hunt town, your nerves raw, only to find yourself on a desolate road leading to an even grimmer fate. You're now in a leper colony, an isolated outpost on the edge of nowhere, think southern France or England around 1350. The air's heavy with the smell of decay and herbal salves, and the silence is broken only by muffled coughs and the creak of wooden crutches. You're not a leper, but you've been banished here maybe for a rash, mistaken for the disease. You're surrounded by hunched figures in hooded cloaks, their faces hidden, and you're trying not to stare. Historical records like church registers show leper colonies were dumping grounds for anyone with skin ailments, real or imagined. Lepers were shunned, forced to carry bells to warn others away. A quirky tidbit. Some colonies brewed their own healing ale, laced with herbs that did little but taste awful. Historians still argue whether these colonies were more about isolating the sick or easing society's fear of contagion. You're standing in a muddy yard ringed by ramshackle huts. Your home is a lean-to with a straw roof leaking already. The ground's damp and your boots sink as you shuffle forward. You're handed a wooden bowl of thin gruel by a figure whose fingers are bandaged stumps. You nod thanks, but your stomach's churning. You're thinking of the witch hunt village's glares. At least they had bread. Here, food's scarce and what you get is barely edible. You're hungry, but you're more afraid of the water stagnant from a ditch nearby. The colony's a prison without walls. You're free to wander, but where? The nearest town's miles away and they'd drive you off with stones. You hear a bell clanging. Another leper's signalling their presence. You're supposed to carry one too, but you haven't yet defiance or denial, you're not sure. A joke to lift the gloom, why'd the leper colony throw a party because nobody showed up? You're not smiling, though. You're itching paranoid about every spot on your skin, wondering if this is your life now. You pass a chapel, its door ajar, where a priest mumbles prayers for souls already half forgotten. The sick huddle inside seeking hope, but you keep walking. Disease is king here, not just leprosy, but fevers, sores, and despair. You're healthy, you think, but the air feels toxic. You think back to the Bandit Woods shadows. Even they felt alive. This place is a graveyard for the living and you're stuck in it. Survival means swallowing fear, eating the gruel and praying you're not really one of them. You grip your bowl, take a sip, and keep moving one hopeless step at a time. You've stumbled away from the leper colony's grim isolation, your mind heavy with the weight of forgotten souls, only to find yourself in a new kind of hell. You're now in a war-torn border village, somewhere along the contested edges of France or the Holy Roman Empire in the 1370s. The air's thick with smoke and the metallic tang of blood. You're cowering behind a crumbling wall, the ground shaking from distant cannon fire, or maybe it's just trebuchets. The village is a wreck, burned homes, trampled fields, and the constant wail of someone mourning. You're no soldier, just a villager caught in the crossfire of endless sieges. Historical records, like chronicles of the 100 Years' War, describe how border villages were ravaged by armies English-French, or mercenary bands who looted and burned without mercy. Entire communities vanished. A quirky tidbit. Some villagers hid valuables in wells only to lose them when wells were poisoned during sieges. Historians still argue whether these villages suffered more from rival lords' feuds or from hired mercenaries gone rogue. You're clutching a sack of salvaged roots, your only food, as you peek over the wall. A band of armoured men rides past, their banners tattered, friend or foe. Doesn't matter. They'll take what they want. You're thinking of the leper colony's silence. Even that was safer than this chaos. The village square is a graveyard of splintered carts and dead livestock. You spot a child darting between ruins, scavenging. You want to call out, but noise is a death sentence, a joke to steady your shaking hands. Why'd the siege stop? The army ran out of villages to burn. You're not laughing, though. Your stomach's knotted and your throat's dry. The siege has cut off everything food, water, hope. You're drinking from a puddle, praying it's not tainted. The well's a trap. Last week someone dropped a rotting horse in it. You're hiding in a half-burned barn, its roof gone. but it's better than the open. You hear screams at night raiders or deserters picking off stragglers. You're not sleeping. Every creak could be a blade. You think of the witch hunt town's paranoia. At least they weren't dodging arrows. Here, survival's a game of chance and the odds are brutal. You're scavenging when you find a loaf miraculously unspoiled. You tear into it, but hoofbeats send you diving for cover. The riders pass, but you're not safe. The siege could last weeks, and you're already weak. You're just a pawn in a war you don't understand, and this village is collateral damage. You crawl back to your barn clutching your roots, and bread praying for a truce. Survival here means staying small, staying hidden, and hoping the war moves on before it swallows you whole. You've crawled out of the war-torn village, your nerves shredded from the constant threat of raiders, only to find yourself in a new kind of desolation. You're now in famine fields, a stretch of barren farmland, in a region like northern France, or the Low Countries around 1315 during the Great Famine. The fields are a sea of cracked earth and wilted stalks, baked by a sun that gives no mercy. You're a peasant hoe in hand, staring at rows that yielded nothing but dust. The air's dry smelling of dead grass, and your stomach's a hollow knot. You're not just hungry, you're starving. Historical records like monastic annals describe the Great Famine as a catastrophe. Rains ruined crops for years and millions died across Europe. Peasants ate roots, bark, even dirt to survive. A quirky tidbit: some desperate souls ground acorns into flour, but it was more poison than food. Historians still argue whether the famine was worse because of relentless weather or because lords hoarded what little grain remained. You're digging in the dirt, hoping for a forgotten turnip, but the soil's hard as stone. Your hands are blistered, and your back aches from hours of futile work. You're thinking of the war-torn village's chaos. At least you found a loaf there. Here there's nothing, fields stripped bare by hunger and desperation. You pass a neighbour, his face gaunt, eyes empty. Any luck, you rasp. He shakes his head. A joke to keep you sane? Why'd the field go silent because even the worms starved? You're not laughing though. Your lips are cracked and dizziness is creeping in. The village nearby is a ghost town. Huts stand empty. Families fled or died. You're sharing a shack with others all too weak to fight over the last scraps. The water's no help, a muddy stream, barely a trickle. You're drinking it anyway, risking sickness. You think of the leper colony's gruel. It was vile, but it was something. Here, you're chewing grass to trick your stomach. The Lord's men still come demanding tithes. You've got nothing to give, but they'll take your tools if you don't pay. You're not alone in this misery. Crows circle mocking your empty fields. You hear rumours of cannibalism in distant villages. Not here, not yet, but the thought chills you. You're too tired to care about shame. You'd eat dirt if it filled you. The sun's sinking and you're still digging, praying for a miracle. Survival here means clawing at the earth, ignoring the hunger pangs and hoping tomorrow's not worse. You drop your hoe, too weak to continue, and stagger back to your shack. The fields don't care if you live and the famine's grip is tightening. You've staggered away from the famine fields, your body weak and your hope thinner than the gruel you can't find. Now you're in an overcrowded monastery somewhere in Italy or England around 1380, a place you thought might offer refuge, but feels more like a trap. You're crammed into a stone cell with dozens of unwashed monks, the air thick with sweat incense and the sour tang of damp wool. The walls are cold, the floor harder, and your bed is a shared straw mat crawling with lice. You're no monk, just a labourer or runaway seeking shelter, but the abbot's rules bind you as tightly as any vow. Historical records like monastic charters show that monasteries often swelled with refugees during hard times straining resources. Cells meant for 10 held 30 and hygiene collapsed. A quirky tidbit. Some monks brewed ale so strong it was nicknamed liquid bread, your only meal some days. Historians still argue whether overcrowding was worse because of charity or because abbots profited from extra hands. You're trying to sleep, but the snoring and coughing around you make it impossible. A monk mutters prayers in the dark, his breath foul. You're shoulder to shoulder, and someone's elbow jabs your ribs. You're thinking of the famine field's open sky. Even starvation had space. Here you're suffocating. The day's no better, you're hauling water-scrubbing floors or copying manuscripts until your fingers cramp. The scriptorium's quiet, but the overseer's whip keeps you moving. You're fed barely watery porridge and that ale which burns going down. The monastery's a hive of disease, no one bathes, water's for prayer, not cleanliness. You're itching and a fever's spreading, someone's hacking in the corner. You think of the leper colony's bells, at least they warned you. Here sickness creeps silently, a joke to lift the gloom. Why is the monastery so loud? Because even the lice are chanting. You're not smiling though. You're hungry, tired, and the abbot's sermons about salvation feel like taunts. You're not here for God, just a roof, but the price is crushing. You're slipping out for air when a monk grabs your arm. Work's not done, he snaps. You're trapped in their rhythm. Prayer labour, sleep, repeat. You think of the war-torn village's chaos. At least you could run. Here the walls hold you and the crowds await. Survival means blending in, keeping quiet, and praying the fever passes you by. You shuffle back to your mat, dodging a sneeze, and wonder if freedom's worth starving for. The monastery's no sanctuary, it's a cage, and you're just one more trapped soul. You've slipped out of the monastery's stifling crush, your lungs craving fresh air, only to find yourself on a wind-swept bluff overlooking a churning sea. You're now in a pirate coast, a vulnerable port town in the Mediterranean or southern England, around 1390, where the horizon is both a promise and a threat. The air's sharp with salt and fish rot, and the docks below are a tangle of nets and weathered boats. You're a dock worker or fisher scanning the waves for sails. Merchant ships bring coin, but pirate flags bring death. The town's on edge, and you're clutching a rusty knife more for comfort than defense. Historical records like port tax logs show that piracy surged in the late Middle Ages, with corsairs raiding coastal towns from Cornwall to Sicily. Villages lost everything goods people hope. A quirky tidbit, some pirates left ransom notes nailed to church doors demanding gold for captives. Historians still argue whether piracy thrived because of weak navies or because local lords secretly profited from the loot. You're hauling a crate of salted fish when a bell clangs, sails spotted. Your heart lurches. The town scrambles, women grab children, men arm themselves with pitchforks. You're thinking of the monastery's crowded cells. Even that felt safer than this open target. The docks are chaos shouts, dropped barrels, and the stench of panic. You're not a fighter, but running's no option. The hills behind are too steep, and pirates know the paths. You grip your knife useless against their cutlasses. The air's tense, the sea deceptively calm. You spot a ship, black flag. Your stomach drops. Raiders hit last month, burning half the warehouses. You hid in a cellar, hearing screams through the floor. You're not sure you'll be lucky twice. A joke to steady your hands, why'd the pirate raid the port? Because the tavern's ale was worth dying for. You're not laughing, though. Your hands shake and the knife feels heavy. Life here's a gamble. You're fed sometimes fish stew, stale bread, but pirates take the best catches. The water's brackish wells too close to the sea. You think of the famine fields' cracked earth. Hunger's familiar, but fear's sharper here. The town's crumbling wooden homes rot in the salt air, and no one's got coin to rebuild. You're always watching the horizon's sleeping light. Survival means quick feet and quicker wits, but the sea doesn't care. You duck behind a crate, praying the pirates pass, and brace for the worst. You've barely caught your breath from the pirate coast's looming threat when you're trudging through a new kind of misery. You're now in sinking marshes, a treacherous wetland, in a place like the fens of England, or the Po Delta in Italy around 1360. Your boots sink into black, sucking mud with every step, and the air's a damp haze of rot and buzzing mosquitoes. Reeds tower over you, cutting your hands, and the ground quakes underfoot, threatening to swallow you whole. You're a hunter or reed cutter trying to scrape a living, but this swamp feels like it's fighting back. Historical records like land surveys show marshes were barely habitable floods. Fevers and isolation made them deadly. Villagers eked out lives cutting peat or fishing, but many drowned or sickened. A quirky tidbit. Some marsh folk wore stilts to navigate bogs looking like human herons. Historians still argue whether marshes were worse because of natural flooding or because lords drained them for profit, displacing locals. You're wading through knee-deep muck, a sack of reeds slung over your shoulder. Every step's a gamble, one wrong move, and you're chest deep in slime. The mosquitoes are relentless, their bites swelling your arms. You're thinking of the pirate coast's salty air. Even raiders were less persistent than these bugs. The swamp's alive with croaks and splashes, but you're not fooled. Quicksand and hidden pools wait for the careless. You're soaked, shivering despite the muggy heat, and your cough's getting worse. Food's scarce. You've got some dried fish, but it's mouldy and the water's a stagnant death trap. You're boiling it over a smoky fire, but it still tastes like mud. You pass a hut on stilts, its roof sagging. Your neighbours are gaunt, their eyes dull from fever. Good catch, you call half joking. They shrug. A joke to keep you moving. Why'd the marsh love visitors? Because it kept them forever. You're not laughing, though. Your legs ache and a fever's creeping in. Malaria's no myth here. The marsh is a maze. Paths vanish, and fog hides landmarks. You're lost half the time, guided by instinct and luck. You think of the famine field's barrenness. At least you could see the horizon. Here the reeds close in and isolations await. Survival means steady feet and a strong stomach, but the swamp's patient, it'll outlast you. You slog forward, reeds cutting your palms, praying for solid ground. This place doesn't welcome you, but it's all you've got. You've dragged yourself from the sucking marshes, your skin itching from mosquito bites, only to find yourself in a new kind of harsh isolation. You're now in a mountain hamlet, a windswept cluster of stone huts, clinging to a rocky peak in the Alps or Pyrenees around 1370. The air's thin and sharp, slicing your lungs, and the cold bites through your threadbare cloak. Snow dusts the ground even in late spring, and the wind howls like it's got a personal grudge. You're a shepherd or woodcutter scraping by in a place that feels closer to the sky than to mercy. Historical records like Alpine village charters show these hamlets were cut off for months by snow, with starvation and exposure claiming lives. Trade was rare. You lived on what you grew or killed. A quirky tidbit. Some villagers tied bells to their goats to find them in blizzard's music to freeze by. Historians still argue whether mountain life was harsher due to brutal winters, or because lords taxed the sparse crops to nothing. You're hauling a bundle of firewood, your fingers numb and cracked. The path's a jagged ledge, one slip from a deadly drop. Your hut's ahead, its walls' mossy stone roof weighed with slate to defy the wind. Inside's no warmer, your fire is a smouldering pile of twigs, and smoke stings your eyes. You're thinking of the marsh's muggy haze. Even mosquitoes felt alive. Here the cold's your enemy and it's winning. You're sharing the hut with a family all coughing, too tired to talk. Food's a dream. You've got barley porridge, gritty and thin, and maybe a strip of dried goat meat if you're lucky. The goats are your lifeline, but half are sick, and wolves prowl at night. You're drinking snowmelt, icy and pure, but it doesn't fill you. A neighbour stumbles by his face, frost-bitten. Storm's coming, he mutters. A joke to thaw your fear. Why'd the mountain hamlet stay small? Because the wind blew everyone away. You're not laughing, though. Your breath's a cloud and your bones ache. The hamlet's a prison of stone and ice. No market, no travellers, just you, the goats, and the endless cold. You think of the pirate coast's chaos. Even raiders were company. Here you're alone, save for the wind's scream. Survival means chopping wood, guarding the herd, and praying the snow holds off. You huddle by the fire, its warmth a lie, and brace for another night. This mountain doesn't care if you live, but you're too stubborn to die yet. You've stumbled down from the freezing mountain hamlet, your fingers still numb, only to land in a place that trades cold for a different kind of cruelty. You're now in a slave market, a bustling trade hub in a port city like Venice or Lisbon around 1400. The air's thick with salt sweat and the sour tang of fear. You're not a buyer or seller, just a labourer hauling crates, but the market's horrors are impossible to ignore. Stalls line the docks, not with fruit or cloth, but with people chained hollow-eyed, sold like livestock. You're dodging whips and shouts, trying to keep your head down. Historical records like Venetian trade logs show slave markets thrived in medieval ports, trafficking captives from Africa, Eastern Europe, or war-torn regions. Prices varied by age and strength. And no one asked questions. A quirky tidbit. Some traders offered warranties on slaves, promising they'd survive the voyage. Small comfort. Historians still argue whether these markets grew because of economic demand or because war and piracy supplied endless captives. You're heaving a crate of spices, your back screaming when you pass a platform. A man stands there, wrists bound as a crowd bids. His eyes meet yours, pleading, then blank. You look away ashamed, but you're powerless. The market's a cacophony, merchants haggling, chains clinking, and the sea's restless churn. You're thinking of the mountain's silence. Even its ice felt cleaner than this. You're paid a pittance, barely enough for bread, and the irony stings you're free, but only just. The heat's brutal, the sun baking the docks. You're thirsty, but the water's a shared bucket cloudy with grime. You think of the marshes, stagnant pools. At least they were quiet. Here cruelty's a business. You see a child no older than 10 dragged to a ship. Your stomach twists, but protest means a beating or worse. A joke to dull the pain. Why's the slave market so loud? Because misery's got a price tag. You're not laughing, though. Your hands shake as you stack another crate. The market never sleeps. At night, torches light the sails and the cries don't stop. You're bunked in a shed with other labourers, lice-ridden and cramped. You're not chained, but you're trapped quit and you starve. You think of the war-torn villages' raids. Even they felt less deliberate. Survival here means shutting your eyes to suffering moving fast and praying you're never on that platform. You hoist another crate, the weight crushing, and keep going. This market's a machine, and you're just a cog one step from the chains. You've slipped away from the slave market's relentless cruelty, your heart heavy with the weight of what you've witnessed, only to descend into a darker abyss. You're now in a torture dungeon deep beneath a castle, in a place like Castile or Bavaria, around 1380. The air's damp and rank thick with mildew and the coppery tang of old blood. You're no prisoner, just a lowly servant tasked with hauling water or cleaning cells, but the screams echo through the stone corridors, chilling your bones. Torchlight flickers, casting shadows that twist like ghosts, and the iron bars of the cells glint with menace. Historical records like judicial accounts show medieval dungeons were used for punishment and coercion, not just confinement. Torture devices, racks, thumbscrews were common, often to extract confessions. A quirky tidbit: some jailers carved tally marks on walls to track successful interrogations like a grim scoreboard. Historians still argue whether torture was more about enforcing law or satisfying sadistic lords. You're carrying a sloshing bucket, trying not to slip on the slick stone floor. The walls are slimy and chains rattle in the dark. You pass a cell where a man slumped, his wrists raw from manacles. He mutters delirious and you hurry on. You're thinking of the slave market's open horror. At least it had sunlight. Here the darks await and the screams, God, the screams, pierce your skull. You're not the one on the rack, but every cry feels personal. The dungeon's a maze of low ceilings and tight passages. You're ducking under beams, avoiding the workroom where the real horrors happen. You've glimpsed it: wooden tables, iron tools, bloodstains no one bothers to clean. Your job simple: fetch water, scrub floors, ignore the rest. But ignoring's impossible. A guard barks at you to move faster, his whip coiled like a threat. A joke to keep your sanity. Why's the dungeon so quiet? Because the walls scream for you. You're not laughing, though. Your hands shake, spilling water. You're fed gruel, stale crusts, but it's hard to eat with the stench. The water's from a barrel green with algae. You think of the mountain hamlet's snowmelt. Even that was cleaner. The prisoners get less, if anything. You're free to leave the dungeon, but the castle above's no kinder and you've nowhere else to go. Survival here means numbing your soul, dodging the guards' tempers, and praying you never end up in those chains. You dump the bucket, the splash echoing, and head back for more. This place thrives on pain, and you're just a shadow passing through. You've climbed out of the torture dungeon's suffocating gloom, your hands still trembling from the echoes of screams, only to emerge into a town that's a tinderbox waiting to spark. You're now in a fire-prone town somewhere like Rouen or Nuremberg, around 1390, where timber houses lean close and flames are a constant threat. The air smells of wood smoke and pitch, and every creak of a cartwheel feels like a warning. You're a weaver or baker living in a rickety home that's half kindling, and the last blaze 6 months ago still haunts you. You're always checking for sparks. Historical records like city chronicles show fires were devastating in medieval towns, often wiping out entire districts. Wooden structures and straw roofs burned fast and water was scarce. A quirky tidbit: some townsfolk kept fire pigs trained to squeal at smoke to alert residents. Historians still argue whether fires were worse because of poor building codes or because no one could afford stone. You're hauling a loom through a narrow street, dodging embers from a nearby forge. The houses loom overhead, their upper stories jutting out, blocking the sky. You're thinking of the dungeon's damp stone. Even its chill was safer than this. Last week, a bakery's oven sparked and 3 homes vanished. You rebuilt your roof with borrowed straw, but it's flimsy. You pass a neighbour nailing boards, his face grim. New spark law, you ask? He shrugs, laws change, fires don't. The town's a maze of flammable clutter hay bales, wooden carts, cloth awnings. You're coughing from smoke. Someone's cooking over an open fire too close to a wall. You're thirsty, but the well's a hike, and buckets are for emergencies. Food's simple bread, onions, but you're eating fast, ready to run. A joke to ease the tension why the town burned down, because the candles wanted a party. You're not laughing, though. Your eyes sting and you're scanning for smoke. Night's worse. Candles and hearths glow in every home, and one clumsy move could end it all. You're sleeping light, your loom by the door for a quick escape. You think of the slave market's chaos. Even that felt less fragile. The town's alive but reckless, and you're caught in its rhythm. Survival means watching the flames, keeping a bucket ready, and praying the wind's kind. You stack your cloth, check the hearth, and brace for another spark-filled day. This place is home, but it's one mistake from ash. You've left the fire-prone town's constant threat of flames behind your nerves, still frayed from checking every spark, only to step into a different kind of trap. You're now in a corrupt court, a town in a place like southern Germany or Italy around 1410, ruled by bribe-hungry lords and their greasy officials. The air's heavy with the scent of wax seals and sour wine, and the town square hums with whispered deals. You're a small-time merchant or clerk, clutching a ledger trying to navigate a system where justice is sold to the highest bidder. Every smile hides a knife. Historical records like court ledgers show medieval towns were often choked by corruption. Lords and magistrates took bribes to settle disputes or dodge taxes. Honest folk were squeezed dry. A quirky tidbit: some officials demanded gifts of livestock to expedite cases. Nothing says justice like a good goat. Historians still argue whether corruption was worse because of greedy elites or because desperate townsfolk played the game to survive. You're standing in a drafty hall waiting to plead your case over a disputed cart of wool. The judge, draped in furs, yawns as a wealthy rival slips him a purse. Your ledger's clean, but truth's worthless here. You're thinking of the fire-prone town's open danger. At least flames didn't pretend to be fair. The hall's crowded petitioners, guards, and sycophants all jostling for favour. You're out of coins and out of luck? A clerk smirks, hinting at a fee to move your case. You've got nothing left to give. The town's a web of favours and threats. You're dodging tax collectors who inflate your dues and tavern keepers who rat you out for a cut. You're eating thin soup, saving every penny. But bribes are a second rent. The water's from a fountain cloudy but free, if you can push through the crowd. A joke to keep your spirits up. Why'd the Lord love court? Because his purse got fatter than his belly. You're not laughing, though. Your hands are sweaty and the judge is eyeing you like a pest. You're not alone in this mess. The butcher next door lost his stall for refusing a bribe, and the widow down the street paid to keep her son out of jail. You're all pawns in a game rigged from the start. You think of the torture dungeon's raw horror. Even that felt more honest than this charade. Survival here means playing dirty or staying invisible, but you're too stubborn to cheat and too broke to hide. You step forward, ledger in hand, and pray for a miracle. This court's a swamp and you're sinking fast. You've escaped the corrupt court's greasy web of bribes, your ledger untouched, but your spirit bruised only to find yourself in a new kind of damp misery. You're now in a flooded cellar, the basement of a rickety tenement, in a city like Bruges or York around 1400. The air's thick with mould and the sour stink of stagnant water, and your boots slosh through ankle-deep muck. You're a tenant here calling this soggy hole home, and you're bailing out water with a cracked bucket racing against the next rain. The walls drip and rats scuttle in the shadows, bold as you please. Historical records like city maintenance logs show that low-lying urban tenements often flooded their cellars, turning into swamps during wet seasons. Poor drainage and shoddy construction made it worse. A quirky tidbit: some tenants used eel traps in their cellars, turning floods into grim fishing grounds. Historians still argue whether cellars stayed flooded because of neglected sewers or because landlords refused to fix what didn't profit them. You're scooping water, your arms aching, but the level's not dropping. The cellar's your only space above families cram the upper floors, and you're too broke for better. Your bed is a damp pallet on crates barely above the muck. You're thinking of the corrupt court's dry halls. Even their scams were cleaner than this. The ceiling groans, leaking from the tenement's weight, and you're praying it holds. A rat swims past and you shudder. You've named him Gerald Misery Loves Company. Food's a problem. You've got a sack of oats, but it's mildewed, and cooking's tough with a smoky fire that won't stay lit. The water's no help. Your well is this flood, and boiling it barely kills the taste. You think of the fire-prone town's wells. Even their ash was safer. A neighbour pokes his head in, bailing his own cellar. Winning, yet he calls. A joke to keep you sane why'd the cellar flood, because it wanted to be a moat. You're not laughing, though. Your cough's worse and mold's creeping into your lungs. The cellar's a trap. Stairs are slick and one fall could break you. Disease festers, fevers, rashes, and you're itching already. You're not alone. Other tenants wade through, cursing landlords who collect rent but never fix the leaks. You think of the sinking marshes' bogs. At least they had sky. Survival here means bailing faster than the rainfalls, dodging rats, and praying for a dry day. You dump another bucket, the splash mocking you, and keep at it. This cellar's no home. It's a fight you're losing, one scoop at a time. You've hauled yourself out of the flooded cellar, your clothes still damp and reeking of mould, only to face a new threat in the heart of the village. You're now in a cholera. Well, a small settlement in a place like rural Poland or southern England, around 1380, where the only water source is a tainted well that's poisoning everyone. The air's heavy, with the stench of decay and sour earth. And you're standing in a muddy square, clutching a bucket, staring at the stone rim of the well. It's your lifeline, but every sip's a roll of the dice. Your stomach's already churning from the last drink. Historical records like parish death rolls show that contaminated wells spread cholera and dysentery in medieval villages, killing dozens in weeks. No one understood germs. They blamed bad air or curses. A quirky tidbit. Some villagers tossed holy relics into wells to purify them. Spoiler, it didn't work. Historians still argue whether well poisonings were worse because of livestock runoff or because no one cleaned the water sources. You're lowering your bucket, the rope fraying, and the water below looks cloudy, flecked with who knows what. You're thinking of the flooded cellars, stagnant pools. At least you could boil those. Here, boiling's a chore, firewood scarce, and your hut's a smoky mess. You pull up the bucket, and the water's got a sheen. You hesitate, but thirst wins. You're not alone. Others line up gaunt and grim, filling jugs. A woman coughs, her face pale. Good today, you ask, half joking. She shakes her head. The village is dying. Kids are sick. Elders are gone and the graveyard's growing. You're eating porridge, but it's made with this water, and every bite's a risk. You think of the famine fields' cracked earth. Even their hunger was cleaner than this slow poison. A joke to keep your spirits up. Why'd the well stay dirty? Because it liked the company of flies. You're not laughing, though. Your guts twist and you're praying it's just nerves. The well's a curse, no one escapes. You're too poor to leave and the next village is miles away. You're hauling water back to your hut, dodging pigs that drink from the same source. The Lord doesn't care, he's got his own spring. You think of the corrupt court's bribes. At least they didn't kill you outright. Survival here means drinking sparingly, boiling what you can and hoping your body's stronger than the sickness. You sip, wincing, and carry on. This wells the heart of the village, and it's beating death into you all. You've left the cholera well's poisoned grip behind your stomach, still uneasy from that last tainted sip, only to find yourself in a new kind of peril. You're now in raided farmlands, a sprawling stretch of fields, in a region like the Scottish borders or northern Italy around 1390, where invaders strike without warning. The air's heavy with the smell of trampled wheat and charred wood, and you're a farmer hiding in a ditch clutching a sickle as hoofbeats thunder nearby. Your crops, your lifeline, are being torn apart by raiders, and the smoke from your neighbour's burning barn stings your eyes. Historical records like regional chronicles show that border farmlands were prime targets for raids, especially during feuds or wars like the Anglo-Scottish conflicts. Invaders burned fields and stole livestock, leaving farmers to starve. A quirky tidbit. Some farmers buried grain in secret pits to save it from raiders. Good luck finding it later. Historians still argue whether raids were worse because of political rivalries or because mercenary bands just loved the chaos. You're crouched low, mud soaking your knees as shadows move across the field. The raiders are fast-mounted men with torches and swords, laughing as they trample your barley. You're thinking of the cholera well's slow death. At least it didn't ride in with a war cry. Your hut's a mile off, but running suicide they'll spot you. You've got a sack of onions hidden under reeds, your last hope, but it won't feed you through winter. A neighbour's scream cuts the air, and you grip the sickle tighter. The fields are a graveyard of your labour. Stalks are crushed and the livestock's gone slaughtered or driven off. You're drinking from a stream, but it's muddy from the chaos, and food's a memory. You think of the flooded cellars' mouldy oats. Even they were something. A joke to steady your nerves. Why'd the raiders burn the crops? Because they wanted a warm welcome. You're not laughing, though. Your hands shake and you're praying the riders move on. You're not alone in this ruin. Other farmers hide nearby, their faces ashen. The village is half empty. Some fled, some didn't make it. The Lord's men are useless holed up in their fort. You're on your own and the next raid's always coming. You think of the war-torn village's sieges. This is faster, but no kinder. Survival means staying low, salvaging what's left, and praying for peace. You crawl from the ditch, the sickle, your only friend, and start picking through the wreckage. These fields were your life, and now they're ash. You've crawled out of the raided farmlands, your hands still clutching the sickle, and your heart heavy with the loss of your crops, only to stumble into a new kind of grueling hardship. You're now in a Crusader camp, a filthy, sprawling outpost somewhere in the Levant or Baltic region around 1290, during the waning days of the Crusades. The air's thick with dust sweat and the rancid stench of unwashed bodies and rotting supplies. You're no knight, just a labourer or camp follower, hauling water or mending tents in a chaotic sea of canvas and armour. The sun beats down and disease festers in every corner. Historical records like Crusader Chronicles describe these camps as breeding grounds for plague and dysentery with poor sanitation and scarce food killing more than battles. Thousands crammed together from knights to peasants in makeshift shelters. A quirky tidbit. Some camps had holy barbers who doubled as surgeons, shaving beards and slicing limbs with the same blade, hygiene optional. Historians still argue whether camp deaths were worse because of supply shortages or because leaders prioritized glory over logistics. You're lugging a bucket of murky water through the camp, dodging piles of horse dung and broken spears. Your home is a patched tent shared with 6 others, its floor a mix of sand and fleas. You're thinking of the raided farmland's open fields. Even raiders left room to breathe. Here you're packed in, choking on dust and the moans of the sick. A fever's spreading half the camp's coughing, and you're praying it's not you. Your job's endless fetch water scrub pots avoid the night's tempers. Food's a cruel joke. You're gnawing on mouldy bread and a strip of salted pork that's more gristle than meat. The water's from a stagnant ditch and boiling it's a luxury. Fires are for the commanders. You think of the cholera wells' tainted sips. At least you could boil those. A man nearby collapses, his face grey. Bad stew, you mutter. But it's probably worse. A joke to keep your spirits up. Why'd the Crusader camp stink? Because even the flies went on pilgrimage. You're not laughing, though. Your stomach's cramping and exhaustion's a fog. The camp's a pressure cooker. Fights break out over scraps and deserters are whipped, or worse. You're not here for faith or glory, just survival, but the camp doesn't care. You think of the monastery's crowded cells, even their prayers were quieter than this chaos. Survival means dodging disease, staying useful and praying the next march doesn't kill you. You dump the water wipe sweat from your brow and trudge on. This camp's a holy war for some, but for you it's just another fight to stay alive. You've trudged out of the Crusader camp's dusty, disease-ridden chaos, your body aching and your mind numb from the grind, only to wash up in one final pit of misery. You're now in a decaying port, a crumbling seaside slum in a place like Genoa or Bristol, around 1410. The air's a brutal mix of salt-rotting fish and the sour tang of tar, and the docks are a maze of splintered planks and sagging warehouses. You're a porter or net mender, hauling crates or patching ropes, living in a shack that's half rotted from the sea's relentless spray. The tide's coming in, and you're already dreading the damp night ahead. Historical records like port tax rolls show that medieval seaside slums were crumbling hubs of trade and decay where storms and neglect eroded homes and livelihoods. Sanitation was a myth. Waste flowed into the same waters used for fishing, a quirky tidbit. Some dock workers chewed seaweed to ward off scurvy, about as effective as wishing for gold. Historians still argue whether these ports decayed faster because of constant storms or because merchants skimped on repairs to pocket more coin. You're hefting a crate of salted cod, your shoulders screaming as waves slap the pier. The shack you call home leans over the water, its timbers black with rot. Inside, it's a damp box, your pallet soggy and mould creeps up the walls. You're thinking of the Crusader camp's crowded tents. Even their dust was drier than this. The port's alive with shouts and creaking ropes, but it's a dying place. Warehouses collapse, and the fish market's a swamp of guts and flies. You dodge a puddle of brine, muttering about the smell. Food's scarce, and bad spoiled fish stew bread that's more weevil than wheat. The water's a gamble. Wells are salty, and rainwater's caught in barrels that breed mosquitoes. You think of the cholera well's poison. This isn't much better. A dockhand passes coughing. Rough tide, you call, he shrugs. A joke to lift the gloom wide the port decay because the sea wanted it back. You're not laughing, though. Your hands are raw, and a chill's settling in your bones. The port's a trap. Storms batter it, thieves prowl the alleys, and the work's relentless. You're paid in scraps, barely enough to eat, and the sea's always watching, ready to claim what's left. You think of the fire-prone town's sparks. Even they felt less inevitable than this slow rot. Survival means hauling one more crate, patching one more net, and praying your shack stands another day. You drop the crate wipe sweat from your eyes and keep moving. This port's a graveyard of dreams and you're just trying to outlast it. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the waves with a fleeting gold, you pause to catch your breath. The port quiets, save for the gentle lap of water and the creak of moored ships. You're bone-tired, but there's a strange calm in this moment, like the world's holding its breath. You've walked through filth, fire, and fear streets choked with sewage tenements ready to burn wells that poisoned and fields that starved. Each place tried to break you, but here you are, still standing, still breathing. The medieval world was a gauntlet, and you've run it step by weary step. Let the waves carry away the weight of it all, the rot, the raids, the endless grind. You're safe now, wrapped in the soft hum of this story's end. Close your eyes, let the tide's rhythm lull you, and drift into a kinder place. Sleep deep, traveller. You've earned it.